Welcome, everyone. The hour being 5:30 p.m. on Wednesday, November 16th, 2022. The Tooele City Council and the Tooele City Redevelopment Agency are meeting in a work meeting being held at Tooele City Hall in the council chambers. This is being streamed on YouTube, on the Tooele City YouTube channel. We will open with a roll call. Councilwoman Manzione.
Present.
Councilman Hanson.
Present.
I'm Councilman Brady. I'm also present. I anticipate Councilman Graff will be joining us shortly, and Councilman McCall is asked to be excused from the meetings this evening. We'll move on to item 3, which is our mayor's report.
Thank you, Chairman and council members. Tonight, I have a request, and hopefully you're in support of this for us. Back when the budget was prepared, we put the entire cost of the fire truck in the 41 fund. And when we were prepared to pay for that, some of that we could apply to our impact fees. In fact, it was $55,930 that we could apply. So although we put the entire amount in like I say, the 41 fund, we've now got that amount left in that 41 fund. And what we are requesting is we are hiring some new employees, and we need some additional cubicles. And we also have the original carpet in this building, 22 years old, that we have been doing everything we can to clean and keep nice, but it is becoming very well worn. And what we've done each year is really just put a little bit of money towards some of the suites. We were able to do the carpet here, and we're doing these squares. We would like to do some more carpet and complete the suite in the administration office and in the recorder and parks office. Also the second floor hallway, and on the main floor the public works suite, as well as the stairs that go in the back and in the front, the stairways in the back. And what we're asking is your approval for us to move forward to use some of those extra funds that were used, that were not used for the truck because of the impact fees, and replace this carpet and order some cubicles. Now, anything that is over the $30,000, which we know the carpet will be, we will bring that back to you with an invoice for approval before that happens. Other than that, that's the only item that I have for you tonight.
I don't have an issue with it.
I'm okay with it as well.
Okay.
Same here.
Thank you very much. And then eventually we will come back, and maybe another year we can do the remaining carpet in the basement. It is also very well worn, but we'll do it what we can afford as we can afford it. So thank you very much for your support.
Thank you. 20 years for carpet is pretty good, so way better than I do in my house.
Right. And I may mention real quickly, I know it's another week out, but we won't have a council meeting before, but don't forget our tree lighting ceremony on Monday, the 28th of November at 6:30, and we would love to have you join us there at Veterans Square and be able to participate. And we've got the Tooele High School choir that will be coming to perform also, so be a great event. Thank you.
Thank you. Just for the recorded record, Councilman Graff is now with us in person. We'll move on to item 4, which is our council members' report. We'll start with Councilman Hanson.
Don't have a lot to report today. I missed our last city council meeting because I went to the CRC fundraiser, an event they had to raise money for, both for Harris and for the Community Resource Center, and lots of community support from different people in the community. There's about 100 people there, maybe just a few more, and they raised $135,000 that night. So it was a great fundraiser, and appreciate the support of the city. It helped make that successful. So, but that's all I got.
Thank you. Councilman Graff.
Yes, thank you. And I had a chance to attend the Tooele Technical College awards ceremony where they awarded, they recognized their top students, and it was really a great treat to be there, and it was just wonderful to see what our college is doing and the quality students that they're encouraging. I also attended the CJC meeting this past week as well. And just, I'm working on a project right now on looking for ways to possibly look at getting a town sign in our northern entrance. And so I've been talking with the mayor and some other groups, and hopefully I'll have something to present very soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Manzione?
Sure. I just wanted to let you all know that the Arts Council, we had a meeting this last week, and as you know, Holly Tippett has been the executive director of the Arts Council for a while, but given her new responsibilities within the city and her new job, she has resigned that position, and the Arts Council is going to offer that position to Pam Green, who has been on the Arts Council for not a super long time, but a little while. So. And then that opens up, there is another member had resigned recently, so there are some open spots that have been advertised to the public for the Arts Council. And then I also attended a pre-construction meeting with the Kimballs, so keep your fingers crossed. I think we are moving forward finally on the 1000 North project, so that's good news for the city and could bring some great tax revenue to us. That's my report.
All right, thank you. And I don't have anything specific to report this evening, so we will move on to item 5, which is our discussion items. The first item is a discussion on the Boys and Girls Clubs remodel request presented by Mayor Debbie Nguyen.
Thank you. Council, in your packet, we have included a letter that we received from Amanda Hughes, who's the president and CEO of the Boys and Girls Club. As you are well aware, the city has been a partner with the Boys and Girls Club since they came to Tooele City, and really they probably would not have been here without the help of the city. That's been over 20 years ago. They have been using our Dow James building and also the Teen Center up on 7th Street, and they were finally able to purchase their own building. We've talked about this before. It is up on the south end of Main Street. They are now in the process of getting their remodeling permit approved. And as it has gone through our staff, our fire department took a look at the building, and there are some requirements for fire suppression that we were not sure if they needed or not. It's really kind of borderline whether they do the installation of that or put in more fire hydrants outside the building. As we have discussed this, we really feel like for the safety of the children, the safest way to do that is to do the fire suppression. It is a 3-level building. Does have an elevator in it, and there's several ways out of the building, but we do believe for their safety they should have this. And talking with the architect, the cost is approximately $50,000. So as I talked with the Boys and Girls Club, and their funds are very limited to do this remodeling, I suggested that they write a letter and that we would come and ask for your support from the council to fund the fire suppression in the building. We have some funding that is in our fund balance that was left from the ARPA funding that we would use to fulfill this project if you were in favor of moving forward with this and granting their request. There is also just under $7,000 for building permit fees that they were also requesting. You know, they don't want to be greedy. They really don't. They serve hundreds of children in not only our community, but the surrounding communities as well. And as we talk about ways to spend money that serves those that are most in need, this is one of those, and we have seen what kind of children grow up to be great adults and contribute to our society. So I'm asking tonight for your support. One request is the $50,000. The other is the request for, it is $6,870 for the building permit fees.
Any questions or comments from council?
I would be in support of that. I think it's better to be safe, and fire suppression sounds like a pretty good investment, especially if we're having our youth there. I would also support the 6,000 and some odd change for the permit as well.
I just wanted to clarify, that money was not already earmarked in the general fund, right?
It
Or
is not.
something else?
It is unattached. It is not allotted to anything at this moment, yes.
All right, well, I'm good with that too then.
I support it as well. I think it's a good use of the ARPA funds that we have in the account.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you so much, and I know that they are watching online, and they will be thrilled when we get this. We have been working with them. We're very close to getting those plans approved, and they are hoping to have the remodeling done. It is out to bid right now, and they hope to be in there by April, so this will be great for all of us. So thank you so much for your support.
Thank you. We'll move on. Excuse me. We'll move on to item B, which is a discussion on ordinance 2022-40, an ordinance of the Tooele City Council amending Tooele City Code Section 7-1-5 and Chapter 7-15 regarding fair housing and residential facilities for persons with a disability, presented by Roger Baker, the city attorney.
Thank you, council. We've been working on this ordinance for quite some time. But let me give you a little introduction. You may or may not know that the number of people that can live in a house in Tooele City is defined by the city code. One family can live in a single-family house. That's why it's called that in our single-family zones. A family in our code is defined as an individual, so you can own a house and live there by yourself, or two or more people that are related by blood or marriage, and there's no limitation in you can have a big family, is what I'm trying to say. The other is up to 4 unrelated persons. So any 4 people that wanted to live together in a house that are not related could. There are some situations where more than 4 people that are unrelated would like to live in a house together. They don't get to under our city code. But there are some exceptions, of course. Every law has exceptions, and this exception is mandated by the Federal Fair Housing Act. The Fair Housing Act and part of it is an extension of the Americans with Disabilities Act that says that disabled people have the right to housing just as much as non-disabled people do. And that the government, cannot make it more difficult for a disabled person to have housing than a non-disabled person. So, if a group of disabled people wish to live in a single-family neighborhood, they can. Our code limits it at 4. But this is the key. The Federal Fair Housing Act and the ADA require the government to examine the situations of disabled persons and see if their lives can be improved by allowing a reasonable accommodation. Those are the legal buzzwords, reasonable accommodation. We do that in the workplace by assisting a disabled person to do their job with some reasonable help of one kind or another. I won't give examples, but they still have to be able to do their job, and they still have to be able to come to work. But there are reasonable accommodations. For example, a person in a wheelchair could request that they have altered desk arrangements or bookshelf arrangements or water cooler arrangements. And that would be a reasonable thing to do to help that person have the same quality of employment as a non-disabled person. And we do those things. We have those conversations all the time. In the housing context, the clinical research regarding people with disabilities and their group living arrangements, the science has shown that for a group of people to provide, of disabled people to provide for each other an effective level of support, they need about 8 people together in a dwelling. Well, our city code wouldn't allow that. You can only have 4. So what these homes do is they come to the city and they ask for a reasonable accommodation that would allow more people. And I have spoken with attorneys in Utah that are specialists in the Federal Fair Housing Act, and they agree that if the disabled persons have a need for something the ordinance doesn't allow, and they can demonstrate that need, and it's reasonable to accommodate that need, that we have to do it. That is where the broad term group home comes from. We're a group of people that are not related to each other are living together in a house. There are a couple of approaches to the idea of granting reasonable accommodations to disabled persons for housing, to allow them to exceed the 4-person limitation. One approach is to have in your code a process for conducting hearings and evaluating evidence of reasonable accommodations. The disabled group would apply for that accommodation, would submit a brief, evidence, science, research, and then you would have a hearing officer, or it could be a member of the staff, or a special committee that would evaluate this evidence, have a hearing, listen to witnesses, listen to argument, and make a decision about whether the accommodation is reasonable and should be approved. In order for those hearings to be effective, it requires a competent, qualified person to be the hearing officer. It has to be someone who knows fair housing law and disability law. So it has to be, it doesn't have to be, but it often makes sense for the hearing officer to be an attorney who specializes in those areas of the law. And the more specialized an attorney, the higher the rate. So Sandy City has this approach, and any group that wants a reasonable accommodation has to apply for one, have a hearing, submit evidence, and the attorney then writes a decision and issues that decision. And that costs Sandy City about $5,000 per occasion. And they conduct these hearings on every occasion. So it has the potential to be an expensive approach to the reasonable accommodation issue. South Ogden, a smaller jurisdiction, but still a lot of people, has chosen a different approach. They have recognized that since the science and the research say that a disabled community needs about 8 people for it to be clinically viable, to provide the support that the disabled persons need, why are we going through an expensive hearing every time to knowing that we're just going to approve that reasonable accommodation of 8 people anyway? So they have built into their code an automatic reasonable accommodation for disabled persons to allow up to 8 to live together in a home. So if that were to happen in Tooele, they would not have to apply. We would not have to have a hearing or hire an attorney and write decisions and incur expense and delay. We would simply recognize as a matter of law, as a matter of code, that 8 persons is a reasonable accommodation. It's necessary, and it would be they would get their permit without hassle, without expense. If, however, they wanted 16, which is not uncommon, they would have to have a hearing and submit evidence, not that it is that they need 16 for the business to be economically viable, but that they need 16 for the group dynamics to be clinically viable. It's about the patients, not patients, but the residents, not about the owner. So, coming full circle to this ordinance, we would like to ask you to consider amending the definition of a family in the city code to add up to 8 disabled persons, unrelated persons. It's very simple. We are also recommending that you consider amendments to this chapter. They're not complex legal amendments. They don't make huge changes, but they do take from the South Ogden ordinance things that are helpful that our ordinance is missing. So we just use the other jurisdiction to supplement and fill in some gaps in our ordinance. But the main change is changing the definition of a family, and so that a group of 8 disabled persons is a family and would not need to apply for a reasonable accommodation. They get it. In formulating this recommendation and evaluating these 2 different ordinances in Sandy and South Ogden, I did speak with Daniel McConkey, who is recognized as one of the most experienced fair housing attorneys in Utah. And he has had a lot of success in litigation, both on behalf of the group homes and on behalf of municipalities. He knows the law. He recommends that we go one of these 2 routes. And I recommend that you take the easier and cheaper and, frankly, the most common sense approach. We're going to have to approve up to 8 and anyway, so why are we going through all these expensive, lengthy procedures to get to the same result? That's my presentation for you this evening. I would welcome any discussion.
So even with the change to 8, they still have to apply for a permit, is that correct?
Right, so a family of 8 disabled persons would have to do whatever any other family is required to do to live in their home. So to move into a home, a family doesn't have to have the city's permission. The home's built, they move in. It would be the same for a disabled family. If this group is going to build a house, then yes, they would have to do what anyone else wanting to build a house would have to do. The idea is to really level the playing field and to give them access to the same opportunities and benefits that everyone else has.
I think that answers my question. I was just going to ask you if they was required to have any ADA type accesses or anything, but I would say the answer is probably no, since they're required for the same as somebody who's not.
Right, well, the building code does incorporate a number of the ADA standards, but no ramps and bars and lower counters and those things would not be required for the building permit. Other things would be, like door widths and interior and exterior to allow wheelchairs to navigate are required.
That would only be for a new home being built,
Correct.
because they could just buy a home that's existing and move in,
Correct.
right, without any requirements, all right.
Because we don't require, it might sound odd, but because we don't require disabled fixtures in your homes, we can't require them in a disabled person's home. But they would, of course, have the opportunity to take care of that themselves.
Quick question in regards to that definition. Would that affect like Title 4, Chapter 6 on residential housing? It has a definition of family that refers to, where is it? The International IBC. So it says family means the same definition in Chapter 4 of the IBC. This is Title 4, Chapter 6 for residential housing. Do we need to take a look at that, or is this specific to just Title 7?
Right. I don't think we need to, because Title VII addresses use. Title IV addresses construction standards. So the family definition there is for the purpose of determining what kind of structure we're dealing with and what the standards are for building that structure. So I don't think the number of persons in that family would affect the building standards.
Good to know.
So I think this is adequate to have it in Title VII.
Perfect.
Yeah. And because it's in Section 1, the definitions, Chapter 1, sorry, it applies to the entire Title VII. So anywhere that Title VII mentions family, it goes right back to this uniform definition. So it does have a broad application.
Good to know. Thank you.
So I'm still trying to understand, there's a section 7-15-6, it talks about a state certification or licensure. So do you only need that if it's greater than 8 people in the house with a disability? Because not every house with someone who has a disability in it would be a licensed facility, correct? Okay.
Correct. So a family that has a disabled child is just a family.
Right.
And they would not be regulated under this alternate definition. This would be 8 disabled persons that are not related, that are living together as a family. So to answer your question, those group homes, to use the common vernacular, are regulated by the state and need licensure. But so we will require that whatever licensure the state is required to give them be in the file. Other than that, we would treat them the same.
Okay.
And I don't purport to know the state regulations of all these different kinds of group homes and facilities. They get rather complicated.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
I don't think that answered your question when I read it.
Well,
I mean,
that's-
that brings up another question to me because it says prior to the city issuing a certificate of occupancy. So if somebody just bought a house, we wouldn't be issuing a certificate of occupancy, right?
That's correct.
That would be a totally separate thing. Like if I am in charge of a group home and I just bought a house and I'm gonna have, fill it, with residents there, I'm kind of on my own to get licensure a different way than through a residence, or
Right.
through occupancy.
Right. The certificate of occupancy comes into place on new dwellings or remodeled dwellings that need building permits. The certificate of occupancy, the purpose of it is to say that the home is complied with all of the building codes and is ready to be occupied. That's what banks require before they will lend on the house.
Sorry.
No, and I just want to make sure that there's not facilities where there's disabled individuals who aren't being cared for
Licensed.
properly. So that's why I brought up the licensure and how they get the permits and things like that.
Right. And when I mentioned state regulations and how complex they can be, a residential facility for persons with a disability is not a residential treatment center or a medical treatment clinic. Those are regulated differently. There are different uses in our code. The state requires different licensure. So this is the least regulated of the group homes by the state, is my understanding.
Okay. All right, any other questions or discussion on this topic? Is the plan to bring this to a business meeting then? Is it on there?
Because this is a zoning ordinance or a land use ordinance, state law requires us to take it to the planning commission, let them vet it, discuss it. They have to have a public hearing with 10 days' notice. And state law then gives them the opportunity to recommend to you from a planning perspective what they think you should do with this ordinance. So, yes, we would present this to the planning commission I think we've scheduled it for December, and then bring it back to you in January.
Great. Thank you. We will move on to item C, which is a discussion on Gardner Bat water rights fee in lieu request. This is presented by Jared Stewart, the Economic Development Director.
All right, hello, council. So this request, which you should have in your packet, is from Gardner Bat. They are a developer who own property on 1000 North, kind of near the Blinder gravel operation there. So just on the west side of the city limits off 1000 North. They are requesting 14.22 acre feet of water for the first building or phase of their development. And Gardner Bat is as I've talked to them after receiving this request officially, we just started having conversations with them too. And they're requesting, to have a waived or reduced fee in lieu of conveying water rights to assist in their development. They understand you have discretion for that, though. Really, as we talked about this, it's important to them to have a sense of confidence that they'll be able to develop something on the site. We all know water's a scarce and an important resource. They understand that, and this would enable them to build their first structure in the phase. They don't have a particular user in mind right now at this stage. They know that they'll be able to build a spec building and fill it. That does seem typical and not unusual at all in the market right now. I know we see that at the Peterson Industrial Depot. They've done similar things where they build a spec building, and then even as it's under construction, they've gotten users in. So this request would essentially create a cap that would say, okay, here's 14.22 acre feet. That's your cap, and they wouldn't pay. If there is a fee in lieu, they wouldn't pay that until the building permits are issued anyways, which at that point they would know, they might know what their tenant would be and what the more specific use would be. One question for the council, as we talked about this in staff meeting this week, so Councilmember Brady's already heard some of this, is, how would you as a council like to handle these requests? We're getting them more frequently than we have in the past, which is good, indicative of, in a way that we're developing and we have requests for business. Would you like to approve these by resolution, as one question that came up, or more of just, what's the process by which you would like to approve these? Sometimes if it's by resolution, then you've been able to, in the past, I think, kind of justify and say in the resolution, here's the reasoning. And, that brings up the question, what is a good reason in your mind to approve these? And what I think that's just something that might be of interest to discuss to you. So we're kind of asking those questions and want to have that discussion. And I think that's all I have to say. So.
Any comments about that? I heard the discussion in staff meeting, so.
I always think these requests are kind of chicken and egg. So I understand why. I understand the point of selling water and having them pay a fee in lieu, which I'm not in favor of reducing. I'll just say that right up front. Sure. We had a lengthy conversation about increasing the price. I think we should charge the price we've set. But I get that. But to just say, sure, we'll sell you some water, but we don't know what's coming, I kind of have a little bit of issue with that, because I want to know that they're going to generate something for the city. And, I've met these people. They're great. I think they will, but just to say we're going to build up something and if we build it, they will come is probably true, but what's going to come? I don't know. So and I think we should do it by resolution, but it's the chicken egg thing. It's hard.
I think the mayor used the exact same words.
Oh,
the
that's
chicken
funny.
and the egg.
I think I said chicken and the egg. And what I think that would be something that would be more beneficial, because when we do have an empty building, we don't know the business, we don't know how many employees, might be 100, it might be 10. We don't know what kind of wages that they're going to have, we don't really know the capital investment that they're going to make. We may know the cost of the building, but what equipment might be in there that's going to produce some taxes. We at one point, several years ago, within the RDA, had a policy for tax increment. That was something that the city did quite often, or the RDA did, was offer a tax increment. You build this, we'll give you this much increment back. I think it would be beneficial for us to put together some kind of a table that would also help you to say, if you bring this many jobs, these kind of wages, this much of a capital investment, we would be willing to do the payment in lieu to provide the water, because we know the water rights are not there. And until that changes, this is something we have to do. If you're not allowing them to do the payment in lieu, we're not bringing any business, and we know we can't do that. But because we don't know on items like this what to do, we can say, listen, here's our table. You meet these criteria, and we will be able to do the payment in lieu for this many acre-feet of water. And we just really put that policy together. It can be broad, but still enough that you can give the developer, the potential business coming, confidence that you are going to support them with the water when they need it, when they build these buildings, and that we know that the business will come. I don't really know any other way to do it, but that's just an option, and we would be more than happy to work on putting that information together, and then we can look at it and talk and tweak it and make it work.
So I agree that we should probably keep it as a resolution. I really like this idea. I mean, I'm thinking about the past 6 months, we've had one project that required water that I think we're pretty unanimous that wasn't a good idea. So I think that oversight is something we need to continue to do, and not necessarily to censor businesses, but just to make sure that the water, which is a resource which is so precious to us, is that we actively manage and think about that before we do it, as opposed to just automating it, which makes a lot of sense. But I think water is so critical right now that it's worth the time for us to have that discussion. And I think the mayor's idea of this schedule makes us so we can give a more uniform answer to all businesses, as opposed to just picking on a business saying no because whatever. I really like that. And we might have additional feedback about a particular business that we think that may not be the best use of water. So it kind of gives us the tools to make decisions. It gives businesses information to go, okay, I think we can anticipate roughly what could happen. So I think that's a good marriage of ideas there.
I can see it getting real complicated to create a policy to do that. I mean, because you can't, I don't know. Of course, I'm going to be pro-business, but the business is any business that comes in is going to give us tax, even if it's just property tax. You know, and then the people that work there, we're going to have sales tax possibly from businesses. But you don't want to have a policy that's going to drive development away from our town either. So I don't know. I guess when we come up with one and then we tweak it and tweak it and tweak it to encourage businesses to come, but still, water is such a problem.
Agreed.
But our water is because we're not the only source of water in the valley, right?
Yeah.
Like we have
This would
it.
be Twila City.
Yeah, so I think the city should be using our fee in lieu to bring in the best businesses that are going to benefit the community
Agreed.
the best. And so
Right.
I don't think it's deterring other businesses from coming to our community, because there's other sources that they can get water. But as a city, we're trying to get low water use businesses, high paying jobs, things like that. And so then I think we need to be more selective with the people we're allowing to use the fee in lieu. So
Specifically with Gardner Bow, we have had those discussions, and they understand that they can build a building, but if we have a water user that needs 1 million gallons a day, we're not going to be able to provide them that water, nor will we want to. And that option's just off the table. And so these companies or developers already know our water situation, and they, and they're very conscientious about that and looking. If we have somebody that's bringing in 100 employees and the only water they need are for restrooms and for maybe a break room, we'll take that all day long when they've got good wages and it's a good mix for jobs that would be created for the individuals that live here in our city and in our county. So I think that can be part of that policy.
Also with this note, there's a line where they say they'd like to have a conversation with the city to minimize the amount of irrigatable landscaping. So 40% of their recommendation roughly is for outside irrigation. So the mayor and I have briefly talked about coming up with ideas and industrial ways to not require so much irrigation. And I don't know if that's something we want the administration to start working on, where we start to look in this industrial area, do we really need any grass? Or do we just want rocks? Like, would that
I agree.
lower
I mean,
the-
we're asking the residents to do that in their yards.
Yeah.
We certainly should not require businesses to have as much landscaping as we do.
And I
Already.
believe, I had some discussion with Andrew about this, and Jim, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's no requirement for grass. There's a requirement for trees, right? And as I discussed it with Andrew and reviewed these numbers that they have in their request, we both thought probably that number for irrigation was high in their request.
Well, that's good, because I was a
so-
little concerned that
Yeah.
that much of it was
Yeah, and
6 acre feet almost, yeah.
And I would anticipate that they'll understand if they're paying a fee in lieu, that they'll want to realistically reduce their irrigation as well. So, and that's in line with the conversations I've had with Gardner Bat as well. So,
And we would love to change that code. I mean, we know that Las Vegas, even St. George, industrial areas are not required to have any of that kind of landscape at all that has to be watered. I am so disappointed when I see that we require trees, they plant trees,
They die.
and a year later, they're dead. They didn't water them, or they didn't turn on the sprinkler or whatever to make that happen. They met the requirement, but the trees are dead. So, we're requiring something that they're not going to take care of. And an industrial area is different. So let's plant our 100 trees in our parks and our open spaces and not in our industrial parks.
I agree.
I would just add one more thing, and that's in light of your discussion, Ed, about having a policy, and maybe it's more of a guideline. So, yeah, if you can, if this, then there's a really good chance the city council's gonna go for that. It still has to come to us and for the oversight and whatever, but, because I think it's fair to businesses to not have any, it's not unfair for them to say, maybe they'll sell it to me, maybe they won't, but if they can kind of reasonably check off some boxes, it gives them a better idea, I think, of what we're looking for.
I wouldn't want to build a multi-million-dollar building and then have the city say,
Right.
sorry, no water.
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly where they're at. And Gardner Bat has also been a very great partner with EDC Utah. They are working with them currently to bring businesses here, and there may be one already for that building.
EDC Utah should work with Tooele to get more water here.
Yes. If they had that ability, they would, because they're a great team
they
to
are.
work with. They certainly are. And they understand the low water user. And I really know that there are certain areas of the state, most areas of the state, that if it's a large water user, they don't even look at them, entertain that. They say, send them on their way.
That's good.
okay. Well, I think we'll be back to kind of wrap this discussion up in the business meeting. So,
Perfect.
thank you.
It sounds like there's a general consensus that we should do it by resolution, though, correct? So we put it on the business meeting tonight, but it's not by resolution the way it's written now, so,
We can put it on another meeting
yeah. we'll just
and bring it
table that
back
tonight.
when you get to that point.
We'll make a motion, and whatever passes we'll do, right?
Are they coming to the business meeting?
They will be watching on YouTube. I think they're already, I assume they're on listening now, so.
And I think that their comfort level is just that they know that we're willing to work with them. We are willing to work with them, but we've got to have more specific information before you can say, hey, you bet 14 acre feet. You may not only need 7, 6, whatever. And we get to that point, but I do believe that this developer will be a great partner for the city to develop this industrial area. They are committed. They're also working with the Economic Development Division of the county also, so working together. We're going to become site-ready areas, so it'll be good.
Great.
All right, thanks, Jared. All right, move on to item D, which is a discussion on the Pratt Aquatic Center fees presented by Darwin Cook, the Parks and Recreation Director.
Good evening, Council. Thank you for allowing me to bring this back to you. We've taken some of your considerations and your recommendations and implemented those into creating a non-resident fee for some of the services at the pool. So for the daily admissions, that first group there, and before we start, I'd like to just say that, I know this is the 4th time that we've discussed this, and I feel that it's important that we have good discussions about this because the last time we adjusted rates at the pool was 2015. So I think it's good that we, have this conversation to make sure it's right. Let's do a good job and let's get them where they need to be because, it's not saying we can't bring them back at any time, but most of the time the fees that we put in place, they hold steady for quite a while, and so. I think it's important that we have good discussions, and if it takes 4 times to get it right, let's do it and get it right. So some of those first ones, they will honestly the daily admissions. That is going to be an honor system, just as Councilwoman Manzione had stated that we'll have the fees there. The staff will just ask if resident or non, and then the public can hopefully be honest about it. The other fees that at the bottom where we're talking about passes, those are actually entered into the system through the Sportsman. So we have addresses on all those patrons that are using those services. So those ones are a little easier to monitor and to regulate. Do you have any questions about these? Any recommendations that you would like to see in the change?
I don't have any.
4th time's a charm.
Yeah.
And just on that 10 punch pass, just so I don't know if we discussed this already because the 4th time, so it's just one that's not being used. The bang for the buck is really with the 20 punch pass, and so that's what everybody's buying. And so the 20 punch pass, or the 10 punch passes just become obsolete. Like nobody's even buying it. So.
Looks good to me.
Looks good.
That's good.
Mayor, did you have?
No, I appreciate all the work that's gone into this. And yes, it may be 4 times, but there's been hours spent on our end really trying to get this right. So.
Okay. We will, with your permission, we'll bring it back at our next meeting in a resolution.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, discussion item E is a discussion on Drysdale parking. I'll be presenting this one. So I asked in our staff meeting with the mayor and the administration, I had a concern about a street that is near my house. It's on Drysdale parking, so it's on the map. There's the Cove apartment building right there and then an LDS church building. And my concern is the vehicles on the south side of the road. There's usually 5 to 7 that are parked there. And this road it's not any more narrow than other roads, but just the way it kind of curves a little bit, it can be really tight going through there. So my question to the mayor was if the council has the ability to restrict parking in certain areas of the community. And now I'm presenting this, so I don't really know if it's an administrative thing or if the council is still the one who would make a decision to restrict parking in specific areas. So But this is how this all came about. If you go on Barrow Boulevard, there's still vehicles that are parked on both sides of the street, but that road is wider than Drysdale Way. I don't know if all of you have driven on this road, but I drive it daily, and if there's another car coming the same direction as me, we both slow down and kind of let each other pass. It depends a lot on which vehicle is parked on both sides of the road. If there's a big truck, it's very difficult to get past it. I know there's been an RV that's been parked there in the past as well, and that, to me, was a huge safety issue. I'm only aware of one accident I've ever heard about in this intersection, and I think it wasn't in the intersection. It sounds like someone had a medical condition that they kind of lost control of the vehicle and they hit the parked car. And that's, as far as I know, that's really the only accident, but I know on certain days of the week when there's activities in that church parking lot and they're coming out of the road, it's a little bit worse. And the city has painted some of that red already. So I don't know your thoughts on this particular road or parking enforcement in general, but that's all I have to present, so.
Well, I will tell you that my biggest concern is a fire truck. And if there is a larger vehicle parked on that road, and because of the apartment buildings, there's always cars on that road, parked on the side of that road, that I would not be opposed to painting red all alongside one side. There may be a concern that maybe those 4 or 5 cars that park on that side may need to park on another road farther away, or maybe use the parking lot of what's available in the apartment buildings. It just is what it is. But my biggest concern is a fire truck and being able to, not being able to get down the road and having to take a longer distance to get to a house, and for life and safety. So if that would help and you would like to see that happen, we'll make it happen.
I would just add, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
One of my concerns is I've driven that road, and it is very narrow. And then you add slushy snow, and it gets a little bit more interesting. But my other concern, too, that goes to Council Chair Brady's thoughts, is the location of the street and what's across the street. And you're going to have kids running across. And nothing's worse than having a kid run between 2 parked cars, because there's zero chance for the driver to be aware of that. So I am in support of painting that red for fire trucks, for safety, for drivers, and for the kids that live there, and juveniles, and even adults. I'm not going to say I don't want adults not to be safe. I want them all to be safe. So I support, and I like that idea. I think that's a fair approach.
I can just see there's a lot of them, streets like that in the town that
There are.
we have, and, well, down in the subdivision north of me, that most of them streets, if they're parked on both sides, 2 cars cannot pass each other. They just have to get in their driveway and wait, and it's, the fire truck will barely make it. I mean, it's
Yeah, and I
but
figured-
but the other side of that is, then people have too many cars parked in the house they bought, so they don't have no other place to park them. Here, you might be able to work something out with the church and say, hey, can we use some of these during the day or something? I don't know, but.
So in this particular area, there's, you can't see, it's on the top left of the map, the way I'm looking at it, but there's some townhouse projects that maybe will be built there someday, I don't know. But there's nothing on that whole street, so there
That lot
is,
there,
yeah, there is additional parking over there. It might be a little bit longer walk. But as we've talked about parking in apartments and townhouses, this is one of the concerns I have, and why we say, oh, we need parking, because they do flow onto the street and it does become a hazard. And especially in the winter, like Councilman Graff was saying.
Well, and I think there is enough parking at the apartment building. It's just more convenient to park on the street because it's closer to the apartment than inside where the parking is. So I think there is enough parking.
Yeah, and I think this one is just the geographical location and the church right there. It's just multiple factors that are leading into why I think it should be painted red. So I support painting it red.
I am supporting painting it red. I just see more
Streets.
more of them we need
Yes,
to
I-
do something with. We've talked about them before.
So Councilman
been a
Hanson
problem.
is in favor of painting the town red.
Paint the town
Yes.
red. Yep. That might be fun.
Give us a paintbrush.
Yes, Roger has a comment.
Right. You raised the question of how do we think through whether something is a legislative act in your court or an administrative act in the mayor's realm. And there's not always a bright line between the two. Sometimes there's some overlap even. In this case, I would think that the quintessential legislative act is considering the transportation master plan. That is a planning document, a policy document that says this is how our city will handle transportation on a citywide level. That document could look at when would painting curbs red be an effective strategy to eliminate parking from streets that are too narrow. That's a policy question. Once that policy question were addressed, then it would be the mayor's opportunity to say, yep, that's one of those narrow streets, and yep, we're having a problem. And yep, Public Works Director, go paint that curb. That's the administrative end. Now, when you're looking at any particular street or block and trying to establish a street-by-street policy, that's kind of in the middle as I see it. And I think what you're doing tonight is a perfect way to address issues that are in the middle. All 6 of you talk about them and come to a consensus.
Thank you, Roger. All right, any other discussion about this?
No.
All right,
We will take care of that,
thank
Mr.
you.
Public Works Director. He will have somebody paint that curb red as soon as possible. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. All right, our last discussion item is ordinance 2020-26, an ordinance of Tooele City amending section 4-8-2.1, they threw in that .1 there, of the Tooele City Code relating to infill area street requirements, presented by Jim Bolser, the Community Development Director.
Thank you. We're trying to keep you on your toes with that
Yeah,
point.
you did.
So to understand this issue, I think it's important to kind of understand how we got here. And so what I've put together for you hopefully will help you frame your discussion, but also understand why we're in the spot that we're in. So first of all, it's important to understand the area we're talking about. These are specific to our infill areas. This is a map out of Chapter 714 of the City Code that identifies our 2 infill area geographic layouts. They're identified as Area A and Area B. Now, there's 2 Area Bs, so technically there's 3 areas, but there's one on either side. Area A has a little more leniency to it, and Area B is more of the lenient, but not as lenient as A as it transitions back into the newer areas of our community. And you can see from the addressing, it's the heart of the community. It's from Main Street to 7th Street in Coleman, between 600 North and roughly 400 South, but there's areas that are more or less on the south end. Specifically, the question at hand are 3 roads, 150 West, 50 West, and then Garden Street. And you'll notice that Garden Street has a little break in it. That's where it crosses through the county complex there, where the county offices are. That street doesn't extend through there, but there is Garden Street south of 100 South, and then from Vine Street to the north, and just south of Vine Street to the north. The reason these 3 streets are the ones at issue is because they are markedly different than every other street we have in town. They are, in fact, have long been referred to as alleys. In fact, they're not alleys. They're local class roads that, through their existence over time, have been dramatically substandard, both in terms of their improvements as well as their rights of way. They are markedly all narrower in even their dedicated right-of-way than our local class roads are, and to different degrees, and I'll discuss that in a minute. So what is the impact of treating these as local class roads, as they are? Well, as I mentioned, they're significantly below standard, particularly in their right-of-way widths. So any development that comes in would have significant impacts to their own development by the necessity of dedicating additional right-of-way. Because they're substandard in improvements, simply out of age, these are some of the oldest corridors in our community, there are substantial upgrades to improvements if we treat them just as a standard local class road. And so there are arguments to be made, and I think there's merit to those arguments, that treating them as a standard local class road effectively makes it impossible or very, very difficult to do any level of development along these roads. And the purpose of the impact of the infill zone was created in December of 2015. That was when we first adopted the infill overlay districts into our ordinance. And the intent was to intentionally relax standards to encourage development. As you're all longtime residents of the community, you'll know that these areas incorporate very large lots that are often narrow, that go all the way through the block. For instance, from 50 West all the way to 100 West, as a single long, often narrow lot. So the only way to encourage development of the back halves, which often are left fallow or tend to become nuisances for varying things, a collection of items or just being left native and weeds grow and whatnot, is to find a way to encourage the development of those, either through a minor subdivision that allows another home to be on the back half of it or something of that nature. And so we looked at and established standards in our ordinance that relaxed certain standards. It relaxed the amount of frontage you need, relaxed the way that we calculate our setbacks, etc. Various building standards that encourage those developments. There's a relaxation in water rights and in terms of valuation, and there's various relaxations that are identified specifically in that ordinance to encourage that development. But what that ordinance did not do was address the right-of-way improvements. They left that to the standard policies of the city code. So we're back to this point of how do we do this and how do we deal with these roads? That brings us to November 1st of 2017, in which the council at the time adopted ordinance 2017-27. And that ordinance established two new classifications of roads that are specific to these three corridors. We referred to them as intermediate local class roads and secondary local class roads. The one section of intermediate local class road was identified to be that section of Garden Street that's north of 100 South. And then the secondary class roads were the remainders, 50 West in its entirety, 150 West in its entirety, and then Garden Street south of 100 South. So that makes it break down like this. The section of road you're seeing in blue is that intermediate class road. The remainders in green are those secondary local class roads. And so that's how it breaks out between them. So why did we do that? Why did we separate them? Well, that's a great question. The reason why is because, as we have found in doing that, we did a right-of-way inventory. It was a very unscientific and undetailed inventory, but we took various cross-sections through all three of these corridors at various points along the way, and what we found is that our intermediate class road, that section of Garden Street north of 100, is fairly consistent in its right-of-way width, and even in its improvements to a certain degree. The secondary local class roads, we can't say the same thing. They had quite a bit of variation in their right-of-way width. Some were down as low as, I think, 20, 21 feet in width. Some were as much as 33 feet in width. We also found a number of instances where, almost in all cases, the actual road improvements were even significantly below the right-of-way width. But we also found a number of cases where we've had encroachment onto those rights-of-way as they exist. Historic property lines were considered to be a fence line or some other marker rather than the actual surveyed boundary. And so there's sheds or barns or garages that are actually within the right-of-way. And so how do we then go back and deal with getting those moved, or do we even go about doing that? And so what we found is there was a stark contrast between that one section of garden and then all of the remainders. And so we identified a way to deal with them differently. And what we did is we established two separate standards. The intermediate local class road was identified to require a 30-foot asphalt width with curb and gutter on both sides as the standard improvement requirement for development along that section of garden. The secondary local class roads were simply set up to say, if you're below 26 feet of right-of-way, you have to dedicate to that point and then provide 26 feet of asphalt. No curb and gutter, no sidewalk, no park strips, nothing like that. That was the original setup as of 2017. That's what this is actually the language that was adopted by that ordinance. And so you saw an edited version of this in your packet, but this is the original ordinance language. So that brings us then to about 2018 through early 2020. Staff had a number of conversations about differing properties that wanted to develop, particularly now that we had an idea of a lesser right-of-way requirement. And so we were talking with a number of different property owners about possibilities. You know, what if I did this? What would I have to do if I wanted to do that? And we worked through a number of these things. Some of those proposals worked out, eventually came to the council as necessary and were approved. Others turned out to be a little more impactful and unfortunately did not work out for those property owners. So that brings us then to early 2020. There was a specific property owner in the area 400 South and 150 West. It was a corner lot that was very long, but long in a different way. It wasn't long through the block, it was long along the block. So it was 90 feet wide along its 400 South frontage, and it was almost 300 feet deep all along the 150 West frontage. And that property, we actually dealt with a couple of different property owners that were looking to purchase that and build a home. It was a vacant piece of property. And what happened is that asphalt requirement to 26 feet in width for almost 300 feet in length along the side yard, not even the front yard, became a very heavy burden to those property owners, and a couple of them ended up walking away and seeking other avenues. We had one property owner that eventually did buy the lot and lives there now, is my understanding, that they still live there, who sought a deeper conversation with the staff and the administration on how we deal with this. What that led to was on June 17th of 2020, the council adopted Ordinance 2020-26. What that did was simply update the standards so the intermediate local class road saw no changes. The secondary local class road was approved for a change to remove the asphalt requirement so that the only right-of-way requirement on secondary class roads, again, 150 West, 50 West, and that south segment of Garden, was simply right-of-way dedication if it was below 26 feet. Now, as you all understand, what happens when we do that and we place a waiver like that is that then it falls back to the city to make the improvements as they become necessary. But we have an assurance in this case that the right-of-way is in place. This is the language you saw as part of what was provided in your packet. This is the amendment that was done by that ordinance in 2020. And you can see particularly in subsection 2, the changes that were made to limit the exaction to only the right-of-way dedication. I put this in a little box because this is the interesting piece. Typically, when something is not required, it's simply just not discussed in the ordinance as a requirement. This actually became a specific prohibition. You are not required to do this, which is, and a specific exemption probably is a better term than prohibition, but this is a not uncommon, but not overly common way of doing it, to say that specifically that you don't have to do something. But it's an interesting key to this, to the way this was set up. So As a result, we have seen some increased interest and progress along those secondary local class roads in terms of development. We've had a number of projects that have gone on, either some small subdivisions or individual homes getting built. But where do we go from here? That's ultimately what brings us to your discussion this evening. There's a couple of options. Certainly, if it's something that council ultimately is satisfied in, you don't need to do anything, and we can continue to deal with it in terms of a right-of-way exaction. Or if there is some middle ground that the council is interested in, we could certainly look at putting back some of the requirements that over the course of the ordinance in 2017 and 2020 were scaled back. If we were going to do that, the mayor and I had a conversation earlier today about what would really be a reasonable approach to say, if we're going to move to put something back, what would it be? The key I'll speak for myself. The key for me really goes back to that right-of-way inventory. There are, particularly on the secondary local class roads, we have such a variety and such an inconsistency in the rights of way. It's really difficult to get back to much beyond the 26 feet in width and have consistency unless we want to go back block by block and set up individual standards all the way along those corridors. And unfortunately, the level of inconsistency we have, it would almost necessitate that level of review and that detail of a review. To establish something that is universal for those, it would be staff's recommendation that if that's what direction the council wants to go, that we look at simply establishing a policy in the ordinance that says the 26 feet of right-of-way dedication is still required, but then 26 feet of asphalt is the minimum improvement standard. Obviously, that gets back to questions similar to what prompted the 2020 ordinances, the what-ifs. What if the impact to this property is great, but not to that one? Is that something we want to oppose on an individual property? The inverse is, well, if we don't, then all of the taxpayers bear that burden through the city taking care of those improvements. At the same time, as development continues to occur, we wouldn't be getting right-of-way improvement as well. But then there's other factors in terms, on the flip side is, at what point do we go back or do we go back and say, okay, some of these impediments that were actually in the right-of-way, like barns and sheds, now need to move. And so that improvements can go through. Because ultimately, there will be a responsibility on the city regardless to improve certain sections. Having this in the ordinance and putting back a requirement for certain improvements ends up getting a little spot by spot, and so we'll have some gaps to fill in between. Having that sort of requirement also places the idea that if there's a minimum of 26 feet of asphalt required, they could be improving the far side of the road versus just their side. And so is that a proportional response that we're comfortable imposing? So there's a number of considerations. I think in my opinion, the two primary recommendations for the council to consider as part of your discussion is, are we comfortable doing nothing? Or if we want to do something to change the ordinance, to what degree? And I think that I would recommend that if it is the direction you want to go, that having a 26-foot asphalt width requirement is probably about as good of a step as you can take without getting really burdensome, understanding that there will be some impact on certain individual properties. So that's kind of what I wanted to present to you this evening as far as the history and where we're at, and hopefully I've boxed in the question a little bit for you, but I'd be happy to let you all discuss or answer your questions or however you'd like to proceed.
I was the one who requested this to be discussed, and the reason I requested is because it has come up a couple of times, 2 or 3 times now at Planning Commission, and been a little bit of a discussion item there. And I'm well aware of this road. My grandmother's house and my Uncle Bill's house were on opposite sides of 150 West, and that road was not paved for most of my life. So I understand they lived on the alley, just like you said. So, I mean, I've lived here, and I understand about those roads, and they're different, but there is a little bit more of an impact when you have, in my opinion, if you have one person building a house that's not really going to use 50 West all that much versus an apartment complex that is, we all know, going to use 50 or 150 West for an ingress and egress. I mean, it can't be done on Main Street, really. So, you know, I think somehow we have to find a happy medium, because I don't want to impact people to the point that they can't do anything, but we also shouldn't be impacted. Everybody shouldn't have to take care of something. When I talk to constituents, I say, hey, new development is paid for by new development. They have to pay for their infrastructure. And in this case, it's not really true, you know. So I don't know. I think there has to be some sort of happy medium.
And an additional consideration to the point you're talking about is whether it's a new home or an apartment complex or a new business or something, every new unit or every new resident increases the public safety need, whether that's one visit every 10 years or one visit every day.
True.
It increases the public safety need as well.
I mean, I remember when this came up in various times, and we've had it a couple of times. I think that doing nothing is not the option I would choose. I think there's a need to address this. The 26-foot asphalt requirement to me seems even-handed, because I don't want to adopt a policy that just targets certain people, because that's unfair. And I think having a requirement that's equal and equitable to all people it affects would be the best approach, again, to make it consistent. And so hearing your presentation, which I appreciate, and Councilwoman Manzione's thoughts, I think option 2 for me seems more palatable and something that would address the situation, but also kind of spread the burden.
So I'm just sitting here thinking about it. I mean, because of course we all, well, not Marisa, but the rest of us were part of this discussion. But so before they did all this, before 15, I think, when he was building on the alley or the secondary road or whatever you want to call it, you had to, when you build a house, you had to do the whole road on both sides,
Yeah.
which really wasn't fair.
Right.
So when we're going to change back to maybe 26 feet of asphalt, is that one house on this side going to do that? And we still got an empty lot on the other side of the road? Or
Right.
how are you going to do something like that and even make it so the road's workable?
Yeah, and that's part of the consideration is if we look at a standard development, a standard subdivision where it has a road on the exterior, they would improve their side to a minimum of 30 feet of asphalt, which isn't a full road. That's the base requirement of the city code. If we required a 26 feet of asphalt, there's a potential in this case that they could be going on to the far side of the road. So that's certainly part of the equitable discussion that we need to weigh as a community as to, because if you do split it in half, for instance, and say, you know what, it's 26 feet of asphalt, but you only have to do your half, well, that's 13. Is that enough that we're comfortable with snowplow operations, public safety operations on an already narrow right-of-way? Those are considerations that you folks get to weigh as part of your policy-making roles. And so,
And is there something to separate the individual back halves of, well, it happened to me. I mean, we have the lots behind me where my sons live at each end. Okay, and they did put their curb and gutter in, but just because they wanted it. Well, at least the alley did. And, but you have this, the apartment complex that's going to build 50 units, whatever they're going to build. And they have a lot more than the guy that's the back half of his son's building a lot, and then they can't afford to do $30,000 a curb extra on their, not curb, but asphalt.
Sure.
Because asphalt's so expensive. So
Yeah.
how do we handle that? That's the whole reason we went to the one 2 years ago, because they couldn't afford 300 feet of asphalt.
no, you're exactly right, and that's
I don't even know where you
definitely-
go, for sure. I mean, that's,
Yeah, that's definitely part of the discussion, because we have the equity claims of saying, well, how do you require it of one person and not another, whether that person is an entity that builds large
Right.
structures and developments, or just Joe citizen that wants to build a home for his family,
Right.
you
And
know.
there's probably not a way to separate that. That's a legal thing,
That would,
or it becomes complicated
yeah,
because of it.
if it's possible, I would think that it's incredibly complicated.
So you're saying good luck to us, right?
No, well,
Sounds like
I'm
it.
definitely not saying that, because ultimately, we'll be drafting what you'd like to see and engaging those conversations as well. And staff, we want to have a role in that, because ultimately, we're the ones that implement it according to your policy.
The other side of that is, as you go up and down there, I know Juddy just died and his wife's selling the house and his sheds are on right
Right.
there where that house got built. But now they're selling the shed, so now you can maybe make the right of way. But do we first go down up and down the secondary roads, and it's so hard not to call them alleys.
I know.
Secondary roads and try and fix that problem first? So
Well-
that we have not 20-foot sections and
Yeah.
20 foot to 30, because there is that all over the place.
Yeah, there is. It's quite variable as you go along those corridors. And that's probably more of a policy discussion on when we really want to trigger that sort of an effort. And do we, or is there another way? Because there's, as I'm recalling it, there was situations where we had enough right-of-way, but there were structures in, and there were areas where we didn't have enough right-of-way, and there were structures inside of that. And so I don't know that there's an easy answer as far as when and how we go about doing that in this process.
Well, even think of where the Boys and Girls Club just bought, and the road between Tula Vision and
Yeah.
where they bought, that's a terrible
Yeah,
road.
Yeah.
Terrible.
yeah.
I mean, so I still maintain that we have to do something. We can't do nothing.
Well, and that's
I don't
one
know
of
if I know the
ult-
right answer.
Yeah, that's one of the ultimate ironies in this, is these roads are narrow, they're some of the oldest in the community, and unfortunately, they're some of the in the least repair, should I say. They're in some of the most difficult condition of all of our roads, for a variety of reasons.
I think just as a starting point, we say that there's some areas that are more difficult than others. Let's really identify those. Let's put something together that you can see where there are buildings constructed. They might be 100-year-old barns, but where is the road narrow? Where is our 26-foot right-of-way that we already have? And that we get that documented so that you can see that on a screen and see how many difficult areas we have to work with, and maybe we tackle the easier areas first.
So
It might be
do we earmark some money for a survey or something out of some kind of money we don't have somewhere?
We can.
but,
I don't even know who we would hire to do that, or if we have staff. Let me talk with staff about it and see the best way to go. I think that would help. The only other suggestion, as Jim and I talked, was making sure that asphalt there. The reason for the asphalt and not just the right-of-way is fire truck and
Right.
ambulance access. It's just a life health safety issue, and that's the reason for the asphalt. But I do believe that an apartment building, or even some kind of a multifamily structure, is going to make a much higher demand of traffic than one person's building a single-family home that has entrance on one of the main roads, and their back entrance comes onto the secondary road. I don't know how we make that law work either, but that's another suggestion that maybe can come up, is the impact of what traffic is going to be placed on that road, and then you can determine what requirements that you would have them do. So, more than anything, we wanted to bring this back at your request. But if
Thank
you
you.
have any options and you have any suggestions, we will start working on it, but we would love your input and your help of how to go forward. When we think that we've got enough significant information to bring back to you, we will do that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move on to item 6, which is our closed meeting. There's nothing for closed meeting tonight. So we'll move on to item 7, which is to adjourn. So we are adjourned from our work meeting, and we'll reconvene at 7 for the business meeting.